What happens when a real psychopath enters the ring?
Я думаю, сейчас если он перетерпит эту серию, все, он уже опустил руки. Бигфут опустил руки.
When we talk about fighters with sheer aggression, unfiltered rage, and an unpredictable nature, we often bring up names like Mike Tyson or Wanderlei Silva. But there's one man who takes craziness to a whole new level, a fighter so unhinged that his presence alone sent shivers down his opponent's spines. His name is Vyacheslav Datsik. Datsik wasn't just another aggressive fighter. He was a real-life madman, a street brawler who took his violent tendencies to professional fighting and turned them into something terrifying. With his wild, reckless fighting style and his complete disregard for his own well-being, he became one of the most feared and controversial figures in combat sports history. But here's the real question. What happens when a real psychopath steps into the ring? Today, we dive deep into the insane journey of Vyacheslav Datsik, a man who lived on the edge of chaos and used his mind's darkest demons to destroy nearly every fighter who dared to face him. A troubled beginning. To understand why Datsik became the fighter he was, we have to go back to his troubled upbringing. From an early age, he displayed aggressive tendencies that made him a nightmare for those around him. He wasn't just an angry kid. He was unpredictable, violent, and lacked control over his emotions. While most troubled kids found outlets through sports, Datsik found solace in fighting, not as a sport, but as a way to inflict pain without consequence. Street fighting became his daily routine. He was a feared figure in Moscow's underground fight scene, where brawls often ended with someone knocked out on the pavement. It wasn't just about winning for Datsik, it was about dominance. He wanted to break his opponents, to make them fear him before the fight was even over. But soon, even street fighting wasn't enough. He needed something bigger, something that would let him unleash his madness on an even larger stage. That's when he discovered MMA. Datsik's infamous debut against Andrei Arlovski. Datsik's transition to professional fighting wasn't conventional. Unlike most fighters who trained under disciplined coaches, he brought his raw, unfiltered aggression straight from the streets into the cage. And in his very first notable fight, he faced none other than Andrei Arlovski, a man who would later become a UFC heavyweight champion. Arlovski was everything Datsik wasn't. Calm, technical, and disciplined. He moved like a real professional, while Datsik fought like a wild animal. His punches were reckless, his kicks were unorthodox, and his entire strategy seemed to rely on pure violence. But then, something insane happened. Despite all odds, the 18-year-old Red Tarzan landed a shocking knockout. In a sport where technique was king, Datsik had just proven that raw aggression could still triumph. That fight was the start of his dominance in the Russian MMA scene. He tore through opponents, delivering brutal knockouts and showcasing an unhinged style that left fans both in awe and fear. But with such a chaotic fighting spirit, trouble outside the ring was inevitable. A reign of chaos in the Russian MMA scene. After his devastating knockout win, Datsik quickly became one of the most feared and unpredictable fighters in Russia. He didn't just fight. He went to war. His matches weren't about technique or precision. They were about destruction. But outside the ring, his madness didn't stop. Datsik's troubles outside of fighting became just as infamous as his fights. Robberies, assaults, and erratic behavior made him a danger to both opponents and society. It wasn't long before the law caught up with him. From the cage to a prison cell. In 2007, Datsik was convicted of multiple robberies and sentenced to prison. However, his incarceration only added to his legend. While serving time, he escaped from a psychiatric facility in 2010, claiming that he had supernatural powers. His escape made headlines across Russia, and instead of laying low, he fled to Norway, where he attempted to seek asylum. But even Norway wasn't crazy enough to keep him. He was soon deported back to Russia, where he spent a total of 9 years in prison. Most fighters would have been broken by such an experience, but not Datsik. Instead, as soon as he was released, he immediately went back to training, ready to step into the ring once again. Fighting for redemption. After nearly a decade away, Datsik had one goal in mind, to prove that he still had the power and madness to dominate. However, his reputation made him a liability. Most organizations refused to give him a chance, but eventually, he was offered one last shot. And Datsik did what he did best. He cracked jaws. Even after all those years away, his power hadn't faded. The moment he stepped back into competition, he made one thing clear: I am still here. The Battle of the Madmen, Datsik versus Alexander Emelianenko. Datsik's biggest fight yet came against Alexander Emelianenko, the brother of the legendary Fyodor Emelianenko. Both men were known for their brutality and wild personalities, so the moment this fight was announced, fans knew it would be absolute chaos. And they were right. From the opening bell, Datsik wasted no time. Within just 10 seconds, he landed a thunderous knockout, making a loud statement to the entire MMA world. The Red Tarzan was back, and he was more dangerous than ever. The Battle of the Lunatics, Datsik versus Dos Santos. With momentum on his side, Datsik was set to face Dos Santos, an equally unhinged fighter known for his aggression. This wasn't just a fight, this was a collision of madness. As expected, Dos Santos brought the fight to Datsik with pure aggression, but he underestimated the true insanity of the Red Tarzan. From the moment the fight started, Datsik attacked like a wild animal, throwing bombs that sent Dos Santos crashing to the canvas. He managed to get up, but it was clear. His end was near. A few seconds later, Datsik finished the fight in brutal fashion, leaving yet another opponent in ruins. Can madness defeat skill? Datsik versus Antonio Bigfoot Silva. Next up, Datsik faced Antonio Bigfoot Silva, a former UFC title contender and one of the most dangerous heavyweights of his time. Unlike Datsik's previous opponents, Bigfoot had elite-level skills. But the question was, could skills beat pure rage? As the fight started, Datsik charged forward, swinging wild punches. Surprisingly, he was dominating the Brazilian. Punch after punch, Datsik overwhelmed Silva, leaving him dazed and confused. After a barrage of strikes, Bigfoot Silva looked completely lost, as if he had no idea why he was even in the ring. Once again, Datsik had proved that raw chaos could overpower technique. The circus fight, Datsik versus Fake Tyson. By this point, Datsik's fights were becoming must-watch events. His next opponent, a journeyman fighter named Tyson, but no, not the ferocious Mike Tyson. This was a lighter, faster Tyson, who was nearly 80 pounds smaller than Datsik. As expected, Tyson moved quickly, trying to evade Datsik's punches. But no matter how fast he moved, he couldn't dodge everything. When Datsik finally landed clean shots, they hit like a sledgehammer. For a while, it looked like Datsik was just playing with him, but eventually, he got tired of the game and ended the fight in dominant fashion. The legacy of the Red Tarzan. Vyacheslav Datsik was never the most skilled fighter. He never became a UFC champion or reached elite levels in MMA. But what he lacked in skill, he made up for in pure chaos. Datsik represented the raw and untamed nature of early MMA, a time when fighters were warriors first, athletes second. He was unpredictable, violent, and insanely dangerous. While his career was filled with controversy, one thing is certain: whenever Vyacheslav Datsik stepped into the ring, fans knew they were in for a spectacle. And that's what made him a legend. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the madness of Vyacheslav Datsik, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild fight stories.